Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So if you guys remember, almost a year ago, I created a video explaining the things you should know to prepare for Salesforce developer interview, right? And many people like that, so thank you for that. So what I'm going to do today, right? I've been getting a lot of requests, from different people, um, from YouTube as well as from LinkedIn. That can you make a video explaining the things I should know before I appear for a senior developer Salesforce interview, right? So I do appreciate the fact that the senior developer interview varies from company to company, right? So Google has a different interview process compared to say Amazon or for PwC or Deloitte. In saying that, I would like to mention a few things which I believe you as a senior developer should know, right, or must to have. Right now, when you think about a senior developer, right? Let me explain to you first from a technology agnostic point of view before I get into Salesforce side of things, right? So when you think about a senior developer, right? So a senior developer, in my personal opinion, someone who has at least 5 to 6 years minimum software development experience. I do not consider someone with 2 to 3 years as a senior developer. That's too early for someone to call themselves senior developer. Um, I still consider someone with 2 years as a still someone who's a junior trying to get into intermediate state, right? There are exceptions to that rule, but I do not consider someone with 2 to 3 years as a senior developer whatsoever. So assumption is 5 plus, right? 5 plus, 6 plus. I have worked with people who got even, I'm not talking from a Salesforce perspective, but in general, right? I have worked with someone who I think he he got like almost 22 years as a developer experience. So that's a senior developer or a principal developer, you can say. All right. So the few things, if you're going to work as a senior developer, the company will expect you to uh, do, right, or expect you to have. First of all, they expect you to have experience to coach junior developers, right? I do understand that most of the developers sometimes, some of the senior developers are not keen, but that's one of the requirement most of the companies do expect, right? You are a senior developer in the team, a junior developer will come to you and say, I have so and so problem, can you help me? So if you're a senior developer, its company will expect you to help that person. That's number one. The number two, senior developer. When you talk about senior developer, right, it's not just only about development. It's not only about coding. Coding forms just one part of it, right? Senior developer main job is to understand customer requirement or business requirement and transform them into a solution, right? And you form, so you are a part of that entire journey. Sometimes you will be involved from right from the planning stage to the implementation stage. Sometimes you will be only involved from a development stage to implementation and post support, right? So senior developer plays a major role, and some of the companies don't even have a title called senior developers. Like some of the companies, like especially in New Zealand, right? I'm going to talk about from a New Zealand perspective. Uh, it might be similar in Australia, or I don't know anything about the United States or for that matter, other countries. So I cannot speak on behalf of those countries. So I'm just talking purely from a New Zealand perspective, right? In New Zealand, most of the companies have a flat structure. What that means is that you will have just a title called developer. So someone, you'll be working with someone, he got like 20 years experience, he's a developer, and someone who's 2 years experience is a developer. Now you must be asking, okay, so how do you differentiate? It depends upon his experience. So obviously a senior developer or developer will get much higher salary. That's obviously the case because if someone say, I just give you a very rough estimate, right? Just don't quote me on that. It's just a rough number. I picked it up uh, from a Glassdoor, and other website. Say, for instance, if a developer, a starting out developer in New Zealand, right? Say, for instance, Wellington or Auckland, will make say 60 to say 60K, right? decent money. But someone with 20 years experience might be making 150, 160K, right? Even though they both have the same title, but the job responsibilities varies, right? A senior developer is more responsible for end-to-end delivery of a project, mentor or coach your junior developers. You are expected to do code reviews and guide them with a better coding standard. Uh, or even sometimes you have to get involved with the process as well, right? Build a process framework so that any developer come on board can follow it. So now that's one of the things, right? That's normally expected, right? And like I said, development is not just only about coding, right? It's beyond that. It just sometimes you're expected to even wear different hats. Like, it's often expected a senior developer to think from an architect as well, right? Like, the place where I work, right? We don't have asset. I mean, we do have architect, but sometimes, right? Like I give you my example. You guys, if you're following me in LinkedIn, you know which company I work, right? So I work as a senior dev slash architect. What that means is that I've joined as an architect, but I have to code most of the time, and also I'm involved in design, solution design, other stuff, which is fantastic because for me, programming is a spiritual experience. That's the way I look at it. For me, it's just not a job. It's just a beautiful experience. I love to do, right. I've been coding for almost 15 years now, so I can do that for the rest of my life. That's the way I look at it. All right. Sorry, I digress. Okay. So now companies like Google, right? They expect you to know a little bit more. The interview process is different. I have a few mates who work for Google Australia as well as Google United States. So usually Google, even though if you're going as a Salesforce developer, they will expect you to know about algorithms. That perhaps will be your first round. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of them, but this is what I've heard. Um, so, like they will expect you to know about sorting, and they will expect you to know about the time complexity, the bigger annotation. So those things they expect you to know, which is pretty good in my opinion, right? Because I personally believe, it's good to know, and they will test your data structure knowledge, which is fantastic, right? Like, I mean, if you're a senior developer, you should have fairly good understanding about what are first in first out, what is a queue, what is last in last out. You should have a basic and at least a good understanding about B trees. What is a graph, right? And what about the maps and kind of and performance stuff. So it's the basic thing, right? If you're not sure, there is a algorithm book by MIT Press, so you can go through it. I've read that book like 5 or 6 times. It's a fantastic book, but it's a classic, amazing book. I will highly recommend you if you're a senior developer. Just don't think that you're working in a Salesforce space, you won't need it. It'll help you make a better developer, make you a better choice. That's the way I put it. Right. So, companies like Google might expect you that, but right. Now, coming to the real meat of today's discussion, that's the things you should know before you appear for a senior developer interview. Right, like I said, senior developer is a quite senior position, right? They expect you to have at least 5 or 6 years experience in Salesforce development space. So that means they will expect you to have, say for instance, if you're applying for a consultancy firm, right? They do expect you to have some consultancy experience. So usually in consultancy space, senior developers are often called senior technical consultants. So it pretty much means the same. Um, so except the difference is that you work as a consultant means it's more client facing role. Uh, you know, so yeah. So there is a difference though, right? So client facing role means that you have to conduct a technical workshop. The client will expect you to. So if you're implementing a feature, so you have to be part of that design meeting. Sometimes they expect you to provide them with the solution, a proof of concept before you go ahead with the implementation. So most of the developers do such things, but with an exception, right? When I used to work as a .NET developer, I do used to interact with the customer, but the only thing is that I was not involved in um, a workshop kind of things, right? But I do provide them with the documentation saying, hey, this is what the solution going to look like. This is what we're proposing. And this is the cost, right? So that's one aspect of it. So I really don't want to get into consultancy side of things, because otherwise then we will be digressing and we will be talking about something, right? All right. Now, the things which you should know, right? Like I said, 5 to 6 years experience in a Salesforce development space. That means you should have a very good understanding of Apex, uh, very good understanding of object-oriented programming concept. You should have a good understanding of design patterns. If let's say you come for an interview, I might ask you, hey, do you know any idea about factory pattern, or what is command pattern? What is a builder pattern? Um, you can say that, oh, but that's not really important because I've never done so. Well, if you've never done so, right, it's the right time for you to learn it, right? Because just because you haven't worked at some place doesn't mean that a new company will not be doing it, right? Like the place where I work, right, we use design pattern, right? We use a lot of design pattern, right? So, and I like it because I personally believe it will make your code look much neater, much cleaner. And I personally, when I interview someone, right, I personally like to ask if they have an understanding of a solid principle, right? If they say no, then that will raise a red flag for me. Someone with 6 to 7 years experience, if they say to me, like, I don't have any understanding about any design pattern, then I would really question their knowledge, because you have to understand one thing. When I mention 5 to 6 years, I do not mean the same year repeating again and again. So, like, I give you an example, right? Let's say you are an Apex programmer. You're working on a batch job process. So that's exactly you've been doing for 5 years. So do I call you a senior developer? No, I will not, because you only have experience on one field. So and you haven't experienced anything else. So that does not qualify you as a senior developer. All I can say, you have the same experience repeated 5 times in 5 years. So that's pretty much it. So I do not look at that as a senior developer experience. For me, senior developer experience means you have experience in a broad range of uh, tech stack in Salesforce. For instance, um, if you are a Visual Force developer, that's fine. I mean, I do appreciate the fact that the Visual Force page has been very popular for many years. Uh, so that's great. If you do not have LWC experience, I do not consider that as a negative aspect to it, because at least someone who understand how the front end works, you should Visual Force page, that's good enough. But having LWC is nice to have, because I do understand that if you're someone who worked with Visual Force page, will pick it up LWC in a very short span of time. And I do expect you to have a strong understanding of Apex programming. What that means is that you should know what interfaces are, why do we need an abstract class, what is protected, and different access specifiers, right? So, for instance, if I have a base class, um, you know, where I mark it as private method, can I access that in a inherited class, right? That kind of question. It's a basic object-oriented question. I expect you to know, because if you're a senior developer, if you don't understand object-oriented programming, right, then it raises the red flag. Um, from a Salesforce perspective, I do expect you to have a strong understanding of a platform. At least you should have a fairly decent understanding of flow, about escalation rules, approval process. And I might ask you, right, why do you need to use flow? Why can't we use Apex? So, like for instance, there was a scenario where I have to migrate the flows to Apex because of extreme performance issue. And even in the flow, although I do appreciate the fact that Salesforce wanted to sell Salesforce as a low um, code platform, but the way people write flows, right, sometimes just makes me mad, because it's just disgusting and ridiculous the way they write flows, right? And it just leads to so much of performance issue, right? So, for instance, you have process builder, you're calling a flow, and that process builder firing up the scheduled flow like thousands of times, 50,000 times. Then it got to hit that interval limit, for the flow to be in pending status. So you have to have a very good understanding of the platform limits. I mean, that's something I expect from a Salesforce developer, and you should know, some understanding of the platform limits, right? Like circle limits, flow limits, the transaction limit in the batch process, platform cache, which is, I expect you to have some understanding of platform cache. I do have expectation that you should have a fairly good understanding about the trigger frameworks, right? If you come to me and say, I wanted to write a business process within a trigger, I will tell you to, that's not a good process. That's not a good thing to me. All right. So if you look at this specific place, right, developer.salesforce.com, you will see a lot of things, right? Let's look at the build here. All right, Apex, like I said, I do expect you to know LWC. It's not a biggie for me, but I believe that if you're preparing for Salesforce developer interview, it's good for you guys to have some understanding of LWC because Salesforce is pushing very hard for LWC. So what that means is that you should have a fairly good understanding of JavaScript. If you have worked with Visual Force Page, then I would assume you would already know JavaScript, right? HTML, you should have fairly good understanding. CSS, yeah, you should as well, right? If you do not have much good understanding, I mean, I think it's not a big thing, but at least if you understand, uh, different aspects of LWC, which is great, right? Salesforce Flow, I said, you should know developer experience. Um, One thing I do expect you guys to know, like if you're a senior developer, you should have some integration experience. I mean, I cannot buy that argument that you mean a senior developer and have never integrated Salesforce with anything. That means you haven't explored the platform yet. Integration forms a big part in Salesforce ecosystem, right? When I started working in Salesforce, in the same year, I integrated Salesforce three systems, right? With SAP, with Oracle, and another payroll system. And it taught me so many aspects and limitations of the platform, so that I have to write my APIs in a different way. So the thing is that, you should have some integration experience. And um, And a mobile SDK is not a big thing, so I can if you it's nice to have if you worked with iOS or Android if you have integrated Salesforce SDK uh, to implement say service functionality, it's good. I mean, if you don't, it's all right. DevOps plays a very important role. I mean, I do expect you to have at least some understanding of DevOps, right? I do expect you to have some understanding of the Git. If you're a senior developer, you should at least know, right, about the version control, about CI/CD, right? Doesn't matter you have done with Azure, that's good, or Bitbucket, that's fine, or AWS, that's good as well, or GitLab. So it doesn't matter, right? It's technology agnostic, or even if you have used Jenkins, that's fine as well. I mean, and the reason why I'm saying is that at least you should understand why do we have to use DevOps, right? If you come to me and say, "Oh, I don't care about the version control," that raises a red flag for me straight away, because we are in 2022, right? So DevOps is very important. It's a core aspect of Salesforce. Yes, Salesforce do not sell to DevOps, right? But even if you use Copado, right, to your CI/CD, that's good enough, at least. Or even if you have used GearSet, that's fine. I mean, at least I will know that you have understanding about what the DevOps process is all about. Right. And security, right? That's one thing is very important. I mean, if you come to me and say, like, I'll give you a very simple example. I have seen people abusing record types, right? And that's it's just a very, 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 very bad design for me. People don't understand permission sets. They keep on fiddling with the profiles. So that's all will raise a big red flag for me. I mean, I expect you guys to understand a good security model, right? You should tell me why do we use permission sets? Why do you have to use profiles? If I give you a scenario where I have to, add few fields and change the page layout, will I use profile? Will I use permission set? So you have to, and the one very common question I often ask, can you tell me the difference between profiles and role? I can guarantee you that, based on my previous experience, I've seen people get this wrong most of the times. And it just amazes me. And I'm like, wow, and this is just ridiculous to the core, right? If you can't answer me, if you can't give me a real time scenario about the difference between a profile and role, that shows to me you haven't understood the security model very well. Right. So I mean, these are, I mean, like, when I interview someone, I don't ask you what is a batch class or why do you use a future method. I don't really ask that question because my interviews are pretty flexible, right? I expect you guys to know. I can make out from your experience. I'm mostly interested to know what your previous experience, the things you have initiated, things you have done, or I won't even ask you if you've done anything outside the work, right? It's nice to have if you have a GitHub. If you have your own GitHub profile, you make your own project. That's good to have. That showcase that you're passionate about it. Um, but yeah, and from a platform perspective, right? You should know Service Cloud, Sales Cloud at least, right? These are the core platform. I won't expect you to, know Marketing Cloud unless you've been interviewed for a Marketing Cloud role. Then that's a different question. I won't expect you to know Tableau unless it's a requirement for the product that you should know Tableau. I won't even ask you about MuleSoft unless we are doing a lot of stuff with the MuleSoft, right? Then if the profile says that you have to know MuleSoft, you have to know Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, then yes, I will be asking you MuleSoft. But if somebody says it's nice to have, you know, it's nice to have. But if you don't have, that's fine. Because I do see a lot of the companies, right? I do hear people from different parts of the world, they say, oh, our interviews, like, they ask you questions like, what is batch class? What is schedule? Or Apex? Why do we have to use the future methods? What can you explain to me? What is protected? Um, well, I mean, all I can tell them, right? Different companies have different interview process. I'm not saying it's a good practice or bad practice, but personally, if I interview someone, I don't ask these questions, right? Because for me, their previous experience speaks in terms of their knowledge, right? I mean, I do appreciate the fact that Salesforce is huge. A lot of things expected to know, but the most important thing, what I tell you, right, you should have a right attitude to learn things, right? I mean, if you don't know, that's fine. You don't know, right? I don't know anything about, say, for instance, uh, their the new functionality Salesforce released this year. I mean, I know a little bit about like their data collection filter, but I haven't looked at it. So if someone questioned me on the 2022 feature and say, "Hey, you don't know Salesforce," that's a stupid thing to do, in my opinion. That's just like someone trying to show off, and that just I just tell that person, I just don't want it to be rude, but because that just BS to me. If someone try to question, test your 2022 knowledge, that means that person themselves have nothing else to ask and they haven't prepared the interview. And that's totally disrespectful to me. Like you're wasting someone else's time, not even come prepared. So I often asked, like I remember there was one interview, they said, we haven't prepared what question to ask. So I asked them, all right, so can I leave? Because it's just waste of my time, right? I don't have an hour to waste just because you can think what question to ask. So when you come prepared, then, I don't have, because when you are skilled, right, like, you can demand stuff, right? And I believe that there should be a kind of professionalism that goes both sides, right? Between someone who's asking a question and someone who's, getting interviewed. So there should be a level of professionalism. So the person who is interviewing you should come prepared. The questions, excuse me, the questions they should ask. I mean, it's totally disrespectful, right? Some people, they come to the interview panel and say, "Hey, we haven't seen the resume." That's to me shows that the company's not interested in you. So that raises the red flag to me straight away. Fortunately, in New Zealand, we don't have such scenario, but you can always tell from a company, right? If company don't want to pay you, they will come up with different excuses, right? Oh, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. Then you should ask them, do you guys work on this technology? If they say no, then you can ask, why are you wasting my time then, right? I mean, you have to be honest and upfront, right? I do understand some people are too scared because they say, "Oh, what if I upset the company?" Right? I'm not asking you to upset them. I'm just asking you have to have a proper, conversation with them in a respectful way. You can say, "With all due respect, may I ask if you use this technology? If not, what's the relevance in this from this interview point of view. You can surely ask these things, right? They won't penalize for it because you have every right to ask. Obviously, you are spending an hour of your time. Like, I don't do programming tests. I definitely don't do it. If someone tells me, hey, you have to spend 12 hours to do a coding test, I tell them, look, this is my invoice. I charge $200 an hour. So 10 hours, that's $2,000. I'm not spending, my, 10 to 12 hours just solving a problem. If you can't make out, from my previous experience, then I'm sorry. I don't think that's the best place for me to work. I mean, I'm flexible if they call me for a blackboard interview where they ask me to design, come up with a solution. I'm perfectly happy with that. I love those kind of interviews. But if they gave me 12 hours long test, I don't do it. I'm sorry, I'm not interested. So I just straight away tell them I don't want it to be bothered because uh, you know those companies have trust issues, and I understand that. I'm not judging them, but like I said, each company's had their own way of doing things. If it doesn't work for you, you don't have to work for them, right? Like I don't work for certain companies because of their interview process. Like even if they do the same for 15 to 20 years, so I said, and they're not even willing to pay more. So why bother, right? You can do better things for that time, right? So yeah, I mean, so the few things, I mean, the takeaway from this video, all I can say, first of all, you should have a very good understanding about programming stack. Like you should know how to use uh, at least one IDE, Visual Studio Code, which is the most commonly used. CI/CD, I expect you guys to know. DevOps, at least. I mean, you don't have to be an expert, right? At least you know how the version control works, or if you're an Azure expert, or if you're a Bitbucket. At least if you have done it, you've configured it, it's good to go. LWC or Visual Force Page, I would highly encourage you to uh, learn LWC, but if you haven't, it's all right. It's not a showstopper, but it's good to learn anyways because Salesforce is pushing towards it, right? Trigger frameworks, at least I would expect you to know the better way to write trigger, right? So that is something as a senior developer, it will be my expectation from you. And I will expect you to have understanding of the platform, right? You should know as a senior developer when to code and when not to code, right? That's a very big thing because you can't recommend me, something which come to me and say, I wanted to code. I will ask you, what about the flows? Can we use flows? And if you say no, I'll ask you to explain to me why, the pros and cons, right? If you can't come up with that, that's a bad sign, right? And you have to, as a senior developer, you have to think from an architect perspective. That's very important, right? Because you have to wear the architect hat because you have to build a solution for tomorrow, not for today, right? You have to build a scalable solution. You have to build a solution which is, I mean, I can't say bug free because obviously, you know, we humans do make mistakes. Sometimes one or two bugs can creep in, but that's all right. I mean, at least if you can build a solution to the acceptable standard, that's good enough. And you should be proactive to help your junior team members. You should share that empathy with them. It's very important, right? Or other words, you should have a very good working relationship with them, right? You should not boss around. It's a very bad thing to do, right? And please do not criticize your junior developer saying, "Hey, you don't know this, you don't know that." Well, they're learning, right? So it's your responsibility to work with them, right? And to be patient. It's important, right? Because I tell you one thing, right? If those people you're going to mentor them, they like you, uh, they will stand for you. The things when things goes haywire for you. So these are the people who will stand for you. So you have to make sure that you make them feel comfortable, teach them your art. And there's no better joy in the world than teaching something right? It's the most beautiful thing in the world to do, right? To make people, to empower someone. I can tell you it's priceless. You cannot put a price to it. It's the most beautiful thing you can do to empower someone. So you should be willing to do that. You should be willing to mentor. You should be, and you should think outside the box, right? As a senior developer, you should not always say, okay, this is the first solution I came up with, and let's stick to it. No, that's not a good way to do it. You should have different options. Think about pros and cons, involve your team, and build confidence of your team, and work together as a team, right? Um, so that's one of the things. So yeah, and you should be familiar with the technology. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention about the certification. Many people have asked me how important is certification. Well, it's nice to have. I mean, I'll be very honest because Salesforce is driven by certification. So I would say you should have admin certification, developer one at least, app builder. These three I would say must have um, for your developer role, right? Because admin will give you an idea about the entire platform, overview of the platform. Developer one will, expose you to different development aspects of Salesforce, and the app builder will expose you to development aspect, but in a non-code way, means point and click way. So, and another thing, be confident, right? You should be proud that you have done an amazing job in your previous company and you've been learning all these years. So you should be good to go, right? If you should be fairly confident. I mean, I would say you should be very confident about your skill set and be honest about it, right? You don't have to hide. If you don't know something, just tell them you don't know. I will learn, right? When given an opportunity. And companies should be willing. I mean, they will be willing most of the times, given the Salesforce market is hot, right? So that's pretty much I wanted to talk about, right? If you guys have any questions or any suggestions, please leave your comments, right? I mean, I'll be happy to respond. So this is just a casual video, like I said, right? I wanted to make because I've been getting a lot of requests. So I thought I'll just make it for everyone. Right. So that being said, I hope you guys have an amazing Sunday. Adios.